Hey guys, Coach Joel here. We have now covered two of the most important subjects in poker. Obviously, number one is the rules of the game. In last session, we talked about bankroll management and how to properly structure your finances and your bankroll so that you're in the proper game and you're playing at a stakes that's right for you. Today, we're going to get into a little bit more of nitty gritty of how do I position myself within the poker landscape, because there are a lot of different formats of poker to play. And for some, making this decision will be extremely important. There are a lot of people that may be successful in one format of poker and not in another. And we'll cover tournament play versus cash game play. Both require a very different set of skills. And then we'll cover live versus online play. So without further ado, let's dive in. I think the type that most people are familiar with are tournaments. Tournaments have, they have the best marketing. It's the World Series of Poker, and what you watch on TV are the big tournaments. These are the big payouts. These are the get-rich overnight stories, and they come with prestige and recognition when you can win one of the big events. So a lot of people have heard of the people that have won a lot of these big tournaments. However, what they don't consider is that these tournaments have a lot of variance, and these are enormous fields in the biggest tournaments. Even on smaller scale, tournaments can be hard fields to crack. Even if you're playing in a tournament with 100 people, there's still the likeliest outcome is that in that one given event you may lose your buy-in. So it's a lot of pros and cons to tournaments, because even the best players, in the world go through extreme variance with tournaments. There's just a lot of things that can affect your results on any given one day, especially in short stack poker. These are some of the big differences. As I mentioned, tournaments have bigger payouts than cash games. They tend to have easier competition because a lot of beginning players like to start with tournaments. It's a fun idea that on any one given day, you can run good and, make a big score. It's also smaller upfront losses. So, you're entering a fixed buy-in, and, some tournaments do have add-ons, but generally your losses are capped. And unlike a cash game where you can lose quite a bit more, tournament, if things go wrong, this is a fixed amount that I'm going to lose, and it's not going to impact me too much. And the other pro is just the big thrill of the tournaments. It's exciting to be playing for quote unquote survival when there aren't rebuys, when any pot can determine whether you get to move on and have a chance to win the big thing, or whether you're going home. So there's just an element of these big decisions and a certain degree of pressure and an excitement that comes with that. So some people like that. Other people prefer a steadier form of poker where your tournament life isn't on the line, and that's cash games will appeal to them a little bit more. Some of the other cons of tournaments, like I touched on, there's just a ton of variance when you're playing in a field, especially the larger tournaments, and they tend to be top heavy. So if you want to do well, you have to make at least the top 10%, sometimes even better than that, to place in the money. And it can be a tough experience if you have a good day all the way up until that bubble point, and then you're eliminated right before the payouts begin. There's also more variance, I think, because there's less deep stacked play. With tournaments, the blinds, a key difference from cash games is that the blinds are constantly going up. And whether that's every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, every tournament will have a different structure. But what that means when the blinds go up is that the required amounts that people have to put in the pot to start go up. And that devalues how much your stack is worth. It's basically like inflation. So you may start off with 100,000 in chips, and the blinds are only, maybe the big blind's only 1,000. But as you progress, the blinds may grow to be 10,000 in a later stage of a tournament. And at that point, your 100,000 stack is only 10 big blinds. So when you're making decisions for a small number of big blinds that determine your entire tournament life, there's a ton of variance involved because two people may not necessarily be playing a hand incorrectly if they, if they both get all in with one guy has pocket eights, one guy has ace king. Neither of them are really making a mistake for 10 big blinds. And it ultimately comes down to this sort of 50-50 coin flip that determines whether you survive or not. So that brings us to the second con. Some people will like this coin flip, kind of this gambling aspect of tournaments, but the many coin flips can be frustrating for others, especially after they've spent a long, hard day making countless decisions, countless things, and then they get to a point in the tournament where there's no choice but to gamble, and then they lose the gamble, and they're left feeling kind of like, what could I have even done differently? My whole day came down to this 50-50 thing, and I lost, and that can be hard for some to swallow. Another con of tournaments is that they start at a certain time, and you're on a schedule. The blinds go up at a certain schedule. You take your meal break at a certain schedule, and this can be challenging for some. For a lot of people, what draws them to poker is the freedom involved, the ability to set your own schedule, to come and go as you please. If you're ahead, the ability to walk away from the table with a profit. And with tournaments, you can't do that. You're on a schedule, and you're basically playing to the death. You either win the tournament or you lose all your chips. And there's no real walking away from the tournament when you're ahead and when you feel like it. You're following that schedule to the conclusion of the tournament. And it can be a very long grind. It can be a lot of hours, and not always pay the dividends that you're looking for. So tournaments, in my opinion, they have a lot of great benefits, especially for new players. It's a great way to learn the game. It can be a great way to get rich overnight, but you can't do so reliably. It's going to involve a lot of heartbreak in the middle. It's going to involve a lot of variance, and it'll take you a long time to get to the long run with tournaments. In contrast, cash games are a lot steadier and they're a lot slower. And with cash games, you can make a steady income that allows you to support your lifestyle, whether you want to play cash games semi-professionally, whether you want to do it as, just a side hustle, or you want to do it as a professional. Cash games are a more reliable source of that because, again, you can walk away when you're ahead. You can schedule yourself so that you are at your A game. You don't have to be the absolute best player that day to still make money. You can come in third or fourth at a table and still have a decent payout and not need to be, the top person or the top 10% out of a field of hundreds. You just need to play better than the people at the table of 9 that day and know when to quit your session when you're ahead. Deeper stacks also are present in cash games, and this can allow for more decision points. And for players that are very skilled at poker, decision points are kind of the bread and butter. They want to get into spots where they can kind of exert their will on the game, find spots where their edge is going to be greater. And with deep stacks, there are less of those 50-50 spots that I mentioned with tournaments. You still may find yourself in a spot where you're jamming an ace high flush draw, somebody else has a big pair, and it's kind of a 50-50 spot on the flop, but it's less often in cash games. Cash games are a little slower, a little more methodical. Often by the time people get all the money in by the river, you've had a lot more time on previous streets to gather information about your opponent's hand and really make an educated decision when there's just a lot more money behind and a lot more action and events that occur from pre-flop to the river. With tournaments, you don't have that same information all the time. You sometimes do need to just go with top pair or go with an overpair, whereas with cash games, being deeper stacked, you have more time to kind of gather the information that you need and make an informed decision over multiple streets of poker, not just pre-flop and the flop, which are the most weighted streets in tournament play. Cash games, like I mentioned, you control your own schedule. and that's immensely freeing for a lot of players. And the blinds don't increase. So once you have a deep stack, it doesn't get eroded by the inflation of the blinds. You remain a deep stack until you quit for the day and come back and buy in again, or the next time, or you lose some of that money through other pots. The cons of cash games are that you can't get rich fast, and this can be a tough thing for people to swallow. I mean, if you're playing in one of these really extravagant, high stakes games, sure, but most people, when they play cash games, they're going to be playing at the 1-2 level, 2-5 level. And at these levels, it's, you can lose 2 or 3 buy-ins, but you also, on the winning side, say the absolute best you're going to do on a typical day is to win 3 to 5 buy-ins. Well, at the 2-5 level, that may mean that a fantastic day is when you walk away with $2,000 or a little bit more than that. So it's still nice money, but it's not the big score of a tournament. You'll be able to hit that frequency a lot more often in cash games if you're a solid player. So you can more consistently be winning, but when you win, the prize just isn't the same as winning a big tournament. Another thing that can be hard for people to get used to with cash games is that there really isn't any prestige. If you're a really successful grinder, people may have never heard of you. And it's just not the same fandom that you may get if you win a big tournament. So people who judge not saying we should be doing this, but people who judge their accomplishments in that sort of way where, who has heard of me? How famous am I? Cash games are much quieter, much more kind of anonymous, and you're just not going to get that same buzz that you will from winning a big tournament. Cash games also typically involve stronger opponents. Again, it tends to be a correlation to deeper stacks. People generally know that deeper stacks it involves more challenging poker. It involves more decision points. And so the people playing in deeper stack games are people who have those skills to play multiple streets of poker and who tend to be a little bit more experienced. So that can be an adjustment. And like I said, you just need some additional skills to play in cash games. That can be viewed as a con for somebody who doesn't want to necessarily put in a lot of work into their poker game. They just want to, put up a fixed buy-in. If they win, great. If they lose, it's small losses. And it's a big thrill for that day. It's something they look forward to. But they don't really need to maintain their skills that much unless they're playing in kind of the higher level tournaments. If they just want to be doing this as a really fun hobby and they play in charity tournaments or bar poker leagues or some smaller stakes tournaments, there's going to be less of a skill requirement than compared to playing in deep stacked cash games. Also, there are 2 different types of tournaments and cash games, which are an additional subset. And I truly think that choosing these correctly will determine whether you ultimately are successful and you ultimately enjoy your poker experience. So just knowing what to expect up front from live poker tends to be easier games because these are people who have gone to the casino or the poker room that day. It's kind of a thrill for them. It's a social experience. And they haven't necessarily put in the same study time as players playing online. Another pro, again, it's more social when you're playing live. Poker can sometimes be a little bit boring when you're having to fold hand after hand when you're card dead, and it can be fun to joke around with the people at the table next to you, to have a conversation with somebody you've never met about something unrelated to poker while you're there. It can enhance your experience, and for some people, they're really drawn to that social experience of live poker. Live poker, there's also less time pressure. Unlike with online, in most live poker settings, there is not a clock. There's rules of etiquette. I mean, you can't take forever, or the table will start to pressure you a little bit, and maybe the dealer will get impatient. But in general, you have more time with live poker to make your decisions, to really think things through. It just moves at a slower pace, and this can be a welcome thing, especially for people that are a little bit newer to playing poker. And then for people who really like psychological elements of poker, uh, putting their opponents on a hand is one thing, but also reading their opponents, their body language, their tells, their demeanor, all these kind of secondary things that they wouldn't get if they were playing against some unknown avatar online. They're able to gather that information with live poker, and those that can make use of that additional information, it can be a great advantage and it can be a lot of fun. Some of the cons of live poker is you get a lot less hands per hour than live, and it moves slowly. So moving slowly is kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, you can think things through. It's maybe less stressful for people. But on the other hand, you're getting less hands, so that if you're a profitable player, your edge would be maximized by increasing your volume, by basically getting to the long run faster. And if you're only getting 25 hands or 30 hands an hour or so of live poker, it can move a little bit slow, especially if you're at a table where people aren't necessarily paying full attention when the action's on them and the dealer has to remind them, and they're just a little bit scattered. It can be frustrating if you're a serious player and you really want the game to flow at a certain pace so that you can get enough hands to get the volume that you need to be profitable. It's also less convenient. You have to go into a casino or poker room to play live poker. For some, the casino environment is undesirable. They may not want to be in kind of a noisy environment, or maybe it's smoky. Maybe they're with certain types of people that they would not want to be with, and maybe they prefer that poker remain kind of an antisocial thing, and they can sort of have their privacy and play the game in anonymity without sort of the social pressures that come with it. So it can be less convenient, especially if the casino is not located near you, to go for that drive. And then precise stats are not available. So for people that really like online poker and know how to drill down into another player's game and assess their tendencies and really break things apart, this degree of information is not available in live poker. So again, it's a trade-off. You're getting the information from the live reads. You're getting the additional advantage of seeing the people, maybe knowing who they are. Maybe you've played repeatedly with them in a live setting. So there are a lot of things that you know you can exploit, and that can make strategy kind of fun against these particular players. But then you don't have that really granular data that's available that you would get through online poker by having a HUD and being able to make strategies that way. With online poker, you can multi-table and play a lot of hands. So this is a great way to, it's awesome for beginners that lower stakes are available online than live. At live, often the lowest stake you can play is 1-2, but online you can go to the micro stakes. You can really build your game up from scratch, playing at blinds that are maybe the big blind's only 5 cents. And it's a way of getting a ton of volume in early and really developing solid fundamental play, building your game up. And then once you reach the higher levels of online poker, it's a way to generate profit very quickly, because even though these may be tougher opponents that you're playing against, if you have an edge, you're playing so many more hands per hour, and it just allows you to reach the long run faster. So the variance of poker, while it's greater online, you can get to the long run faster online. And getting to the long run means a lot of those coolers that maybe some horrific set over set cooler would have derailed your entire live poker session, and that would have been the one moment that determined whether you won or lost that day. With online poker, there may be several of those type of hands in the same day, and you may be at the winning end and the losing end of those, so that they kind of cancel out. And again, it sort of becomes more of noise in your results in even a shorter amount of time, as opposed to live, where you may dwell on that day's results, even though it's just short-term noise, and you have to get to the long run through more trials. Online is also convenient. You can play from home. If you have an hour here or there, you can start a session. You can leave when you want. You don't have to drive to a casino and feel as though you just spent the commute, and now that you're there, you want to get the most out of it. So sometimes players that have taken the time to make that commute may stay in a bad game because they feel like they need to justify their time investment. With online, it's very easy to switch around tables, find a table that you have a good skill advantage on. And if that's not available, it's easy to just, turn off online poker for the day and go watch TV or go do something else and find another alternative. So it's easy access. It's not the same commute. And then that HUD data available is a big source of advantage for skilled players who know how to use that. It can give you some insights into how your opponents are playing on the flop, turn, and river, and what the best counters will be against them. In live poker, you may have a general sense of that information. You have to keep track of it, a lot of it in your head, and it can be tough to manage that, especially as you're developing strategies in a lot of different spots against a lot of different types of people. Cons of online poker: it is more isolating. So if you're a social player by nature, you don't love sitting in front of your computer by yourself making these decisions and not really knowing who you're playing up against. It can be a bit isolating and maybe not as fun. You're also making big decisions very fast because you have that time clock with online poker, and you're making it with less information. Even though you have the HUD data available, you may not know the players that you're playing against. You don't have the same live reads, and this can lead to a sense of stress from players. So a lot of the time with online poker, you wind up playing more of a game theory optimal strategy. Game theory means you're playing a solid strategy. It's in theory, nobody knows the perfect game theory strategy, but they're playing something that it's not exploitable, or at least it aims to not be exploitable by other players. And it basically just means you're playing very solid in a lot of different spots. You're making sure that you're balanced. You have a balanced set of bluffs and value bets in a lot of different spots for online poker. Whereas with live poker, you may play a more exploitative strategy. You may know more about your opponents and use that knowledge to find great value bets or great bluffs that you otherwise may not have been able to find with online poker, where you have less information. And then with online, there's always the concern about collusion because you don't know as much about the players. You may not know how a site is operating. So you really need to find a site that you trust, and a site that has cracked down on bots. So online poker has been infiltrated in recent years by players who have designed robots to basically follow a set of rules, and they're basically like chess engines except for poker, where they play a strategy that can beat humans because they don't get tired, they don't tilt, they know the math immediately. A lot of different things that can be programmed. And if you're playing a serious competitive online game only to find that you're at a table full of bots, it can be disheartening. So this is not necessarily a common thing, but it does exist, and it's worth mentioning because you really need to do your homework about where you're playing online before you begin investing serious money. So these are all of the different types of poker. I think it makes sense to experiment a little bit in each of them and find your niche. Ultimately, some people like the variety of bouncing around, occasionally trying a tournament to mix it up while their cash game is their main source of income from poker. Other people just want to play as a hobby, and tournaments are more fun. And then there's always that decision of, should I be a live player or an online player? And it generally comes down to, there's a lot of different considerations, but with live, for somebody who's very good at the psychology of poker, at reading people, who's more of an intuitive player, and who likes the social element, live is going to be a great fit. And for online players, these tend to be people that are more data driven, maybe a little bit more analytical, people who potentially are more introverted and don't crave the social element that comes with playing in a poker room or casino, then potentially online is the better fit. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you experiment a little and ultimately find the best poker forum for you. And once you do, these remaining videos will really help you work on your game and work on your strategy within that forum so that you can be the best winning player that you can be.